Okay, good evening, everyone. I hope I can be heard loud and clear. It's a beautiful day, Friday evening. I know we're all kicking down, waiting for our weekend to start. But we've organized this very important program for the Pediatric Society of Ghana. And we're going to have our facilitators talk to us about very trending things concerning measles. So this program has been dubbed the Measles Response Training for Healthcare Professionals. I hope I'm loud and clear. If anyone can just signal that you can be heard up with a thumbs up. We cannot hear. Okay, so I'll just give a few minutes for. Right, I can see the thumbs up going there. So great, everyone can hear me, I presume. All right, so we'll kickstart. We don't want to waste too much time. We'll start off with a prayer. We'll just ask that we close our eyes as we say a short prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for today. We thank you that we're all in our places safely and we've been able to sit down and organize to attend this webinar that has been organized. We pray that you will grant our facilitators the wisdom to be able to teach us, impart knowledge so that we can learn and do better for our children and also become the great advocates that we seek to be and also to improve our clinical practice. This and many other blessings we ask through your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. Amen. All right, so without wasting much time, I just want to set the ball rolling with some ground rules. We have muted everyone just so that the distractions are very minimal. However, as we go along, if you have any questions, any concerns, please do well to put this in the chat. Our administrators will read it or pick it up and then we can address your concerns appropriately. Also, all the questions and answer time will be moved to the end of the program. And so after all our facilitators have given their talks, then we'll open the chats and also would unmute for those who have questions they want to ask. So these are the ground. Of course, please let's keep our phones on silent for those who would be unmuted some way, somehow, so that the distractions are kept to the barest minimum. We'd like to say a big thank you to the National Executives and Council of the Pediatric Society of Ghana with support from UNICEF for organizing this program. So without wasting time, I'll call on the President-elect for the Pediatric Society of Ghana, the person of Dr. Hilda Mantibia Boy, who is also a specialist pediatrician, to tell us the purpose of gathering. Dr. Boy, over to
you. Good evening, everyone. It gives me great pleasure to be asked to tell us all why we are gathered here this evening. I'd like to acknowledge and thank my colleagues, the National President of the Pediatric Society of Ghana, as well as my other executives, the council, special invited guests, and you all for joining us this evening. As we are all aware, the country was faced with an acute shortage of vaccines. And this has been topical. Every station that you tune into now, you will hear something about the vaccine shortages in Ghana. Also, we're making news outside Ghana. Unfortunately, it's not good news, but we are making news. And as a country, we know that we risk losing the gains that we have made in the under-5 mortality of children in Ghana, as well as all the gains of during the period when we had good vaccine coverage in the country. And since we shared our press statements about 3 weeks ago, registering our concerns about the shortage of the vaccines, we've had several engagements with the media and also have been urging the government to provide the vaccines for our children now, not later, but now. And we have also had a chance to educate the general public about the importance of vaccination and not giving up on getting vaccines for their children. Now, we as a society, the Pediatric Society of Ghana, we advocate, we also train or teach. And so we have found that training or building capacity for our members and other people who work as healthcare professionals in Ghana will help to place us in managing the children who are developing measles and also help to prevent further spread of vaccines while we wait for the vaccines to come in ultimately. And we are happy that today we have put together a team of seasoned resource persons who are very experienced and will be able to train all of us to know what we need to know about measles, the trends, the management, as well as prevention. Thank you all very much for joining us. We hope this will not be the last. This is the first in the series. In the near future, we'll have a public forum for the members of the general public, as well as sensitization for the media. Thank you again for joining. Let's all learn together.
All right. Thank you very much, Dr. Boy. Indeed, I hope we will all learn together. And so we're moving on. We don't want to waste any more time. And also, please don't be distracted at home. I know the children have just come back from school, but make sure you're in a quiet place so that you can grab as much information as you need to know about measles. So next on the lineup, we have, we're going to be talking about global and the national trends of measles in Ghana, and also the resurgence, the role of co-financing. And the person to do this for us is the head of the infectious disease unit at the Department of Child Health at Komfo Anokye Teaching Hospital, in the person of Dr. Anthony Enemel. Please, let's welcome him. Of course, we don't have a round of applause, but Dr. Enemel, your audience, Dr. Enemel.
Thank you very much. Good evening to everyone. And I'm very happy to be part of this important meeting. Am I audible?
Loud and clear, sir.
Okay, thank you once again. I have 10 minutes to tackle these two topics, so I would be very fast, but I still not move so fast that you wouldn't understand. So just let me move on straight. So we are looking at global trends, national trends, resurgence, the role of co-financing, which in reality we think is part of the major problem that we face today in our shortage. So we look at briefly the global, national, and then the co-financing factors. So by the close of this presentation, and I would put off my video because my data band is not that strong. Participants should know about measles trends in Ghana, as well as funding as a potential risk for vaccine shortage. So briefly, when you look at the map on where my cursor is showing, the latter part of 2019 to 2020, most of the major vaccines, including the measles vaccine, seems to be plateauing along 2020, and that was the recent data that I have. And we have outbreaks in the United States, we have outbreaks in South Africa. So what is happening may not be exclusive to Ghana, but I think the challenge may be why. The whys may be different because in the US, the challenge for outbreak is not likely due to financing challenges. In South Africa, probably not solely due to financial challenges. But for Ghana, we can't rule out the fact that just from what we heard from the minister yesterday, money seems to be a major problem. So briefly looking at the measles trends in Ghana over from 1994 to 2001, suspected measles cases and measles vaccination. So our vaccination rates, the red ones you see, columns are actually the number of cases suspected measles, and you realize since 1994 to 2021, the trends have been downwards. We are virtually registering very few numbers. Coverages are high. And looking at the proportions of measles coverage is about 96%. We'll look at the next slide to tell us that the numbers are likely going down. So this one tells us the 16 regions and the percentage coverage. The red indicators means we are not meeting the proportion. So coverage rate is dropping, and this is as at 2020. So the problem in reality started in 2020, October thereabout, and it has gotten to the climax, and that is what has necessitated our meeting. So look at the regions that are Western, North, Western, and again, these are regions. It coincides with where we get reports from. Northern region is doing 84%. Expected is 90% and above. Central region. So we can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 out of 16 regions which are not meeting the expected coverage. And again, we think most of the attribution will be due to the shortage of vaccines in these regions. So we are coming to Gavi and what Gavi does, and I'll be as brief as possible. Gavi is Global Alliance Vaccine Initiative, and this was formed in the year since the year 2000, and they have partners. They see to vaccine supplies, but vaccines must be manufactured. We don't manufacture it in Ghana, and they are not free, so there should be funders. And listed on these are the major funders of vaccines. So once they get the vaccines, countries using them must also pay something, and that is the co-financing principle. And we'll go a bit into the factors that Gavi used to determine how much, not into the details, but just a brief understanding so that we know how these things work and why, if you don't contribute, you are likely to fall short of what is expected. So that is around 2000. Getting to the 2016 and beyond, funding from sponsors started dwindling, and that is where the third prong, increasing country co-funding, came to be a reality. And unfortunately, 2022, 2023, Ghana finds ourselves with shortage in our contribution to make the funding sustainable. So the vaccines are there, the routine vaccines are there, but somebody must negotiate for the funding. But then in country, not only for Ghana, but all other countries, you must pay something, show commitment, depending on your financial status or the level of your finances. Lower middle income, upper, the developed countries, they all contribute to that. So a bit of the terminologies and what it means. So co-financing share, the co-financing share represents the share of the total cost of co-financed vaccine borne by countries. In this case, there's a share that Ghana must pay to the co-financing pool such that we can get the vaccines at the right time and in time. And just bear in mind that it means the country must know the number of children needing vaccines. And if there are multiple vaccines, all these must be calculated. And then the regional distribution, how much is being consumed. And it comes with consumables as well. So again, it's a factor, which means actually if the country is bearing all the costs, it might be too high. That is why we call there's a bit of partnership or co-financing. So it may differ from price fraction as the price fraction is applied to vaccine cost only, excluding devices and freight, because it has to be imported. Vaccines must come with injectables. So not just the adjuvants or the main ingredients, but there are things to go with the vaccines, including getting fridges, cold chain, and all that. There are something we call the grace years, the first year of preparatory or accelerated transition phase. So there's always a transition phase where your ability to fund increases, the proportions increase as you stay longer and as your economic status increases. So it is the first year of preparatory or accelerated transition phase during which co-financing rules of the previous transition phase applies. We have a term called starting fraction. The starting fraction is calculated by dividing a country's total co-financing for all co-financed vaccines by the total cost of all co-financed vaccines based on weighted average prices of the presentations used by the countries. So countries will present how much vaccines they would need with the international cost and adds on. All these are calculated, and there's a proportion of the starting fraction which the country must meet upfront, especially when you come into the program not too long ago. So we have also what we call the price fraction. So starting fraction is different from price. The price fraction applies to countries in preparatory transition and first year of accelerated transition. It is calculated annually by increasing the previous year's fraction by 15%. So these are all Gavi initiatives, and they sit down with policymakers in the country to determine how much to go into this, depending on your GDP and other factors. So procedures and funding levels for routine vaccines. A country's co-financing share is determined by its transition phase, as determined in the eligibility and transition policy. And Gavi has a total policy available online. There's reference at the end. Initial self-financing countries contribute approximately $0.20 per dose number of annual, and the number increases annually. So this is the cost per dose per child that the country must contribute. These are the initial self-financing countries. Now there's the preparatory transition and the accelerated transition. Preparatory transition, and these are all processes which naturally Ghana should or has been part, except that things haven't gone too well, and this is what is ending at where we are now. So when we talk about preparatory transition, it is the co-financing requirement for preparatory transition countries for each dose of each co-financed vaccine is the price fraction of the relevant year multiplied by weighted average Gavi price of the presentation used by the country. So as I said, don't bother too much about the technical, but it's just for us to get an exposure of the terminologies they use, which countries know about very well. So this is the preparatory transition. Now, when a country progresses from initial self-financing to preparatory transition phase, its co-financing follows the rules of the initial self-financing phase in the first year of preparatory transition, known as the grace year. Thereafter, the price fraction, which is applied equally across all vaccines, increase by 15% each year. For example, from 10%, it will go to 11.5%. That is 50% of the 10%. From any new vaccine adoption during preparatory transition, co-financing starts at the same price fraction as for other vaccines in the portfolio in that year. If a country in preparatory transition phase moves back to initial self-financing phase, it is expected to continue contributing to co-financing of the vaccine at the same price fraction as in the last year in the preparatory phase. Now then we'll go to the accelerated transition. In the first year, known as the grace year of the accelerated transition phase, a country's price fraction increases by 15% as in the preparatory phase. But you will start with the preparatory before you go to the accelerated phase. So beginning the second year of accelerated transition, co-financing requirements increase linearly in order to reach 100% of the projected weighted average Gavi price of the vaccine presentations used by the country in the first year. So eventually they expect that countries will be weaned off support. And that's where you reach 100% of your own financing, which we haven't gotten yet. I think we have about 3 years to reach that stage, but actually we haven't even gotten there. We are already struggling with the little proportions we need to contribute. So this is 2021-2025 donor contribution and pledges to Gavi. You remember the earlier slide showing the partners and what they do. And it is very important for us to know that countries support. US, United States of America is one of the biggest funders. United Kingdom, Britain, and smaller countries coming here. But it's quite interesting to know that even countries pledging support for Gavi activities, they also do the co-financing. But I can see Burkina Faso, Cameroon, Uganda, Vietnam, Niger. Surprisingly, Ghana doesn't even support the general contributing pool to Gavi. And to me, it's a bit challenging that even countries we think we are richer than them, Burkina Faso, contributing as much as equivalent of $1 million to support the Gavi fund. It tells you that we really have a lot of work to do if we can't even support generally the fund, neither are we even paying the little that we need to support. So discussion point, I'm almost ending. Now, as a country, if when we can't even pledge regular support as per the 2021-25 appeal for Gavi, we don't even find our name on it, why at least can't we contribute our portion of co-funding to secure vaccines for our children? And finally, I got some of the data from EPI, and when you go to Gavi.org, most of the things I said are here. But for those of you who listen to the news, this is a statement our finance minister made just yesterday. I stand here to assure the House, that is Parliament, that probably 2 weeks or 3 weeks or probably before that, we will get vaccines. I can't lay my hand on specific dates. It tells you we are in real trouble. Some money has been forwarded from what he said to support the vaccines, but I think it is time we get specifics. When do we expect the vaccine? Not 1 week, not 2 weeks, not this 3 weeks probability where we can't lay our hands on anything. Thank you very much. I will end here and hand over to the MC.
Thank you very much for that, Dr. Enema. Thank you for staying within your time. Indeed, your question at the end is thought-provoking, but I'll leave that so that we'll have time to debate or discuss it when it comes to the questions and answers. So please, participants, make sure you keep your questions. You can post them in the chat, you can write them down, and when it's time for us to ask the questions, we'll do so. Thank you once again, Dr. Enema, for that awesome presentation. So moving on, our next presenters, we've got two presenters talking about the local suspected case reports on measles in Ghana as of now. We have the first speaker will be Assistant Professor Abdul Mumin. He's the head of Department for Pediatrics and Child Health at the School of Medicine, University of Development Studies. Then also Dr. Emmanuel Opon, who's a specialist pediatrician and clinical coordinator for the SDA Hospital Asaman. He's also the Vice President-elect for Pediatric Society of Ghana. So to our facilitators, please, your audience, we're ready for you.
Good afternoon to everyone. I'm just going to share my slide shortly. Okay, please, can you see my slide?
Yes, please, we can.
Okay, and I hope you can hear me well. So this is Professor Alassane Abdulmumin. I'm an Associate Professor of Pediatrics at the University for Development Studies School of Medicine. Dr. Opon will do the other presentation on local suspected cases, but I'm doing this one on behalf of the team in Tamale Teaching Hospital that works in the emergency room and the infectious disease center, and then who has seen and graciously documented most of these cases since we started seeing them. So first of all, thank you so much to the Pediatric Society of Ghana and the organizers for giving us the opportunity to share this. We wish we didn't have to do this one, but I mean, unfortunately, this is the situation in which we have found ourselves, and we need to do something about it. I will also ask to put my video off so that at least I can make do with the narrow bandwidth that I have. So okay, so this will be the presentation outline. We will just look at a brief introduction. We will look at the profile, as I have mentioned already, regarding the basic information of the patients, the vaccination history, and then we look at how we have managed them so far, the outcomes and the challenges that we have faced up to date. So by way of a brief background, we in the Tamale Teaching Hospital started seeing these cases in November 2022. So that was the time that we actually started seeing the first cases. So briefly, the case definition for measles would be any person that presents with fever and a generalized maculopapular rash. And if that person also have at least one of cough, runny nose, or coryza, as we call it, and conjunctivitis, then that case meets a suspected case definition. If we do get the laboratory confirmation, either by serology or PCR or any other tissue testing, then that becomes a confirmed case of measles. So with this, in Tamale Teaching Hospital, we started seeing those suspected cases in 2022 in November. Then as at safe March we had about 118 cases. I'm going to do the detailed, analysis of the 97 because that was what I had when I started preparing this slides. Out of this 118, we've had about only 13 of them, confirmed so far. The reason being that the laboratory results are really delaying in coming forth. So there are still cases that we saw in November and December that the results are pending. So we don't have the results. So for Northern region itself in general, as at the measles outbreak situation report for March 1, 2023, there were 570 suspected cases, and 157 of these have been confirmed by serology. Many of them, as I said earlier on, are also pending because the results are not out yet. So if we look at the graph on the right side, you would notice that there have been a background activity for a while, because if you look at right from January 2022, this were, suspected cases for the blue, and then the red shows those that were confirmed. But you realize that as at November 2022, then the cases started going up. And this is the time that we in the teaching hospital started receiving those that are severe and needed inpatient care. So the last month that we have is February 2023. And as you can see, the number of cases, at least the suspected cases, are still going higher and higher. So for the cases that we have seen in the teaching hospital up to now, the baseline information, so the age distribution has been from, we have those who are less than 9 months, about 20% of the cases that we have seen. And then we have a few who are also more than 5 years old, which makes about 4.1%. But I must mention that for those less than 9 months, actually the youngest child that we have seen with measles was 3 weeks old. This is the time that normally we would not expect to see, because if we assume that the parent was vaccinated and we did not have the documentation to confirm if this parent was vaccinated, then at least up till 6-9 months, we do not expect children we expect them to have been protected somehow from the antibodies that pass through from the mother to the infant. But we are having children as young as 3 weeks that presented with suspected case of measles. The oldest one in our cohort was 12 years. And that is actually because in the pediatrics emergency, we receive children up to 12 years, and the rest go to the adult emergency if they presented with complaints. So mainly we have slightly more female population. And we have admitted almost all the cases. So about 92.8% of the cases have been admitted. So if you look at the classification for measles, generally you would have mild cases that just have a fever, generalized maculopapular rash, and also have one of the features I already mentioned, so either a cough, runny nose, or conjunctivitis. If they do not have other complications, then you can manage them as outpatient. But then most of the ones that we have seen in the teaching hospital ended up being admitted because they presented with complications that we will see in the subsequent slides. So regarding the vaccination history and the serology results, we only 28.9% of the cases we have seen so far have at least one dose of measles vaccine. And I must say that for this group of children, there were only 3 of them who were old enough, although we did not have confirmation whether they got the second dose, but there were only 3 who were old enough, so like 18 months and above, who would have gotten the second dose if it was available. So this then means that more than 70% of the cases we have seen so far are not vaccinated, either because they are not due as at 9 months, or because they were, they missed the vaccination. So we also look at the missed vaccination status, and then about so 30 more about 40% of the cases actually have missed one or more vaccines. So aside the measles vaccination, there are other vaccine antigens that this cohort of children we admitted have actually missed during the course of the vaccination history. So for the results, as I mentioned earlier on, we are doing very badly in terms of getting the results back. One of the key issues have been that reagents are not available. So this testing is done centrally. All the samples are taken from Northern Region or from the Tamale Teaching Hospital, but they are sent to Noguchi for testing. And there have been a backlog. Results are not just coming back. So you see that we only have 13.4% of the cases that they are confirmed positive, and then 2.1% are negative. The rest, the results are still outstanding. We looked briefly at the clinical presentation of the cases that we have seen so far. I wanted to share the anthropometry because we know that measles, one of the key complications, during the illness phase or after the illness, is malnutrition. So, and children who are actually malnourished can get measles much easier than those who are not malnourished. So if you look at this chart, you realize that for the weight for age z-scores, there were only, just above 50% of the cases that had a normal weight for age. Unfortunately, the length was not documented for many of the cases, so we did not plot the weight for height. That would have also determined how many of the cases were wasted at presentation. So about 40% of the cases actually are underweight somehow. And this is problematic because in the course of the recovery within the next few weeks, if these cases are not followed up very well, then they are going to present back with tipped into more malnutrition, and they may develop severe acute malnutrition as well. We also looked at the clinical, the presentation, as in the clinical signs and symptoms that the cases that we have managed presented with. And as I mentioned earlier on, majority of them were of the severe type. So they have the rash. The rash, is universal, and then it's found in all the cases. So if the patient doesn't have the rash, then there is no way that you can say they have measles. Then we look at the temperature. So most of them, so more than 70% actually were subfebrile or febrile at presentation. But the key issue is that the rest of the patients that presented with lower temperature were generally patients who were referred from lower level facilities that they were managed before referring. And they all had history of fever actually before presenting to the first health facility. Quite a number of the cases were hypoxic at presentation, or they had borderline oxygen saturation that will require more careful monitoring and then supplemental support with oxygen. Then we have cough, coryza, diarrhea, then conjunctivitis. Then for those who have seen cases of measles before, one of the issues is that for those that have severe measles presentation, they will really look miserable. So they have malaise, they have poor feeding. Some of them develop seizures that may be febrile convulsion, or that may be due to another complication, which probably is encephalitis. So these are things that you need to be worried about when you have cases presenting like this. So if the child presented with the rash, fever, and has either hypoxia, diarrhea, so diarrhea and vomiting can lead to dehydration, or they had conjunctivitis and corneal clouding, or they had seizure disorder, then these children then qualify for severe measles, and they will require admission and inpatient treatment. These are two of the cases that we managed. The one on the left, shows the hyperpigmented macular papular rash. This one was almost, started peeling off, but it started from the head And generally, that is how measles maculopapular rash starts. So it's a cephalocaudal, so it moves from the head downwards, and then it spreads across the whole body. So it's hyperpigmented and maculopapular in nature. The picture on the right, this might not be very clear from your screens, but this one, apart from the child needing oxygen support, also had conjunctivitis with, purulent discharge at the edge of the inner canthus. So for the management of the cases that we have seen so far, this generally what we have done. For managing a case of measles that is severe, most of the interventions are supportive and also geared towards managing the complications. So for those children, especially who that presented with hypoxia or had respiratory distress, we needed to manage the airway through suctioning regularly, and also support them with oxygen until they are stable. They require fluid resuscitation because, diarrhea and vomiting leads to dehydration, and it's one of the common complications that they present with. We should be careful about this because, as I said earlier on, some of these children actually also have severe wasting, so they have severe acute malnutrition. So if the anthropometry is not done at presentation and distinguish between the healthy child and then the one that has malnutrition, then we may end up giving them inappropriate IV fluid resuscitation when they do not need it. Vitamin A is given, and we have given vitamin A to all the cases we have seen so far at presentation, and then within 24 hours. The recommendation is that, especially if they have eye signs, so either corneal ulceration or corneal clouding or conjunctivitis, then there should be another dose that is given at discharge or within 2 to 5 weeks after discharge. A number of the children needed antibiotic support because they had pneumonia, and some also tested positive for malaria that required anti-malaria support. For the skin itch, the calamine lotion that generally contains zinc oxide and also ferric oxide is used for its soothing effect. It's non-specific because it's been used for almost every rash because of the soothing effect, and that is what we have used during the period. Of course, if the case presented within 4 days of the appearance of the rash, the child would need, or the patient would need, to be isolated. And this is where we have one of the challenges, because as we isolate them, then the infectious disease center gets crowded. And as of today, we have some of the patients in our general ward, which is problematic because then the children who are on the ward who are vulnerable as well, or who are susceptible, may end up getting measles from these cases that we admit to the pediatric ward. So for the outcomes so far, most of them have been discharged successfully, although as of today, we still have about 12 cases who are on admission either at the ward or at the infectious disease center. Unfortunately, for the suspected cases, there have been 5 of them that passed away during the course of admission. Generally, these cases have been, one of them had severe acute malnutrition, and this was a case that was managed in a peripheral facility earlier because of the rash and fever. Then within 2 weeks, presented back with severe acute malnutrition and died from complications. The other ones have generally had pneumonia, severe pneumonia, severe enough to require oxygen supplementation and CPAP therapy, but they did not make it. So as I said earlier on, these are all suspected cases because we do not have the laboratory confirmation. Most of the patients have been discharged within 6 days of admission, but there have been a few that stay up to 2 weeks in the hospital. A few challenges that we have documented, and for all of us healthcare workers who might be receiving cases, because we are seeing that the cases are spreading across the country. then space has been a problem because we really would need to isolate those ones that are infectious. But admitting them to the pediatric ward is not the best. But what we have found is that our isolation center doesn't have oxygen supply. So that means that for all the cases that need oxygen support, then you need to admit them to the pediatric ward where we have oxygen to support them. The results are not coming forward, as I mentioned earlier on. And of course, malnutrition, the burden of malnutrition in northern region is already very high. And as these cases wage on, we are likely to get a higher surge in cases of malnutrition that can contribute to our mortality rates. Then because of the inadequate supply of vaccines or the lack of vaccines, the children in the wards or in the hospital that require vaccination, we have not been able to vaccinate them. But for all measles outbreak, one of the recommendations is that even if the child is between 6 and 9 months, once they are in the hospital, then you should vaccinate them. You may not count that first dose, and then you still need to give 2 additional doses when they reach 9 months and then 18 months. But that is enough to reduce their risk of getting the infection, or if they got the infection, you reduce their risk of having severe measles. But we are not able to do that consistently because the vaccines are not in adequate supply. So to conclude, what is happening now is unprecedented for us here and then in Ghana. The last time I have been here for almost 12 years now. And then the last time I saw some cases was in 2013 when I just came to Tamale. But now, this is really overwhelming. The other issue is that most of them are not vaccinated. And these are children who were actually born either at the beginning of just before the pandemic or at the beginning of the pandemic. And some probably did not come when they were due for vaccination because of the fear for COVID. For that time, there were no vaccine shortages, but they were really declining in vaccinations, as was shown by Dr. Enimo. We recommend that also, healthcare providers look out for malnutrition during and after recovery of suspected or confirmed measles cases. And as we have been saying, all along, we are, looking for the vaccines now, not maybe in 2 weeks or in an indefinite time period. Otherwise, we are going to have more cases of measles. We are going to get mortalities from measles. And then our gains in under 5 mortality that we have made as a country, we are going to derail from it, and we might not meet our sustainable development goal for the goal 3.2. So this is a huge issue. We acknowledge all the staff who have been involved in the management of the cases, and I thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Abdul Mumin. I'll give the floor to Dr. Opon to also continue this. After that, I'll give a few housekeeping rules again, just to serve as a reminder. Dr. Opon, if you are ready, please take over. Maybe whilst he prepares to share his slides, sorry, Dr. Opon, you are ready. Yeah. Okay, please go ahead.
You can go ahead with that announcement. So
I just want to let those joining us via YouTube know that, first of all, the capacity for the Zoom has been increased. So if you want to join via Zoom, you can do that. If you want to join via Zoom, but if you still want to watch via YouTube, just make sure you register with the Zoom link so that at least your CPD points can be credited to you. So those are the few options available now. Dr. Opon, please take over. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Ajiman. Yeah, so my presentation will be brief. I'll just be sharing on what we have seen in the Ashanti region based on the data that has been collected over the past 3 years, and also share what has been happening in this region in the past few weeks with all that is going on with vaccine shortages. I must say that this will not cover the full situation. Again, we have challenges with data, real-time data coming from the districts, but at least it will paint the picture and it will point us to a few lessons. So over the past 3 years, if you look at Ashanti region, from 2020 to 2022, the number of suspected cases of measles has been increasing. So in 2020, we had 179, 2021, 383, And at the end of last year, we recorded 397. What is also more interesting is that the number of cases that were investigated by a lab and came out with positive results have also been increasing, 1 in 2020, and it has moved all the way to 13 in 2022. So if you look at this, it shows a clear trend for the suspected cases, gradual increasing. If you go all the way back to 2017, you see that there is a gradual increase in the number of suspected cases that the region is recording. And again, if you look at those that come out confirmed between 2018 to 2019, you see that there is a dip. However, over the past 3 years, you see a steady increase in the number of cases that came out as positive out of those that were sent to the lab. So these are highlights from the Ashanti regional data for 2022. All the districts, over the 46 or so districts in the Ashanti region, each and every district reported a suspected case of measles. And out of the 397, we have lab results for 335. That means we have over 50 of the lab results never been reported. And as Prof. Men was mentioning, it's a challenge. The samples are sent to the lab, but sometimes there are either delays or they never get back to us. Of interest for us in taking care of children is that more than 80% of these confirmed cases were under 5s. They were under 5s. And let's note that we are working towards an SDG goal in terms of under 5 mortality. So it's worth noting. And the district with the highest record in 3 cases for last year was Bekwai municipality. So again, this shows a trend in the number of samples that were actually sent to the lab and the number that actually came positive. If you're not looking closely, you think it's not changing much, but look towards the end of the year. After recording no cases for 3 months, towards the end of the year, we started recording a few. So this is just a map to depict the case distribution of the district. You see again that Bekwai is painted red because they recorded the highest number. But in this current outbreak happening in some parts of the country, what's the picture? We don't really know. We don't really know because from January to February this year for Ashanti region, generally 36 cases were suspected, samples were taken and sent to the lab, 55 in February. So if you are following this trend, it stands to reason that in March, with all that is going on, there may be higher numbers. But you see, the sad part is that we are still waiting for results. We are still waiting for results from January. And that does not help much with what we are trying to do and the response we are mounting to the vaccine shortages. In the district that I work, Secretary South District, this has been our picture. January recorded no cases, but we stepped out awareness campaign and sort of increase awareness about measles, sending out case definitions, flyers. And in March, just in March, and we are just 10 days to March, we have recorded 4 cases suspected at least, and samples have been taken. So the question is it that maybe because there was no awareness about the measles, therefore clinicians, healthcare providers, the public health team were not really looking out for it? Was our surveillance really doing what it's supposed to do? And are we going to see an increasing number over the next few days or weeks? And again, we are still waiting for results for us at February. So this again looks at the trend over the past 5 years, from 2018 to 2022. Again, you realize that from 2020, 2021, there was a dip. But towards the end of last year, the district started recording number of suspected cases. How is this going to go? We just have to wait and see. And of note is that all the suspected cases that had the alarm samples taken and sent, none of them came back positive as at the end of 2022. Are we going to see that going forward? So in conclusion, there's an increasing number of suspected cases in the Ashanti region based on the data available to us. The main concern is the delayed lab results or the lab results that never return for us to take any meaningful public health actions. And as healthcare workers, the message is simple. With all that is going on, our index of suspicion for a possible case of measles, where they meet the case definition, should be high so that we're able to put in the necessary interventions in a timely fashion. So my acknowledgement to the Ashanti Regional Health Directorate and the sub-district health directory disease control units for helping with the data that I just shared with you. Thank you, and over.
Thank you very much, Dr. Awesome presentation there to yourself and Prof. Abdul Mumin. And indeed, I'm sure talking about the local suspected case reports puts into perspective why it's important that we're talking about this now. Some of us, are just talking about it without statistics to back it. But I guess even getting these two trends from Northern region and Ashanti region helps us to put things in better perspective and advocate more for the children we're always fighting for. Moving on, it's important that you can even identify a case of malaria. And so we have Dr. Joyce Nyasimen Dami. She's a consultant pediatrician and infectious disease specialist at Kolebu Teaching Hospital. She's also a senior lecturer with the University of Ghana Medical School. And she'll be talking about a clinical presentation, case notification and investigation, and also infection prevention and control with regards to measles. Dr. Dami, your audience, please.
Good evening, everyone. Dr. Paul, I think you haven't started sharing the slide.
Okay, just a minute. I'll share right away.
Okay. So I'll show myself briefly, and then I will go off because I'm used to stopping to be coughing for a bit. Unfortunately, I have this terrible flu the past week. But today, this topic is very important, and I'm glad that we are doing it. We've heard all the presentations so far. So let's try and understand what the clinical presentation is, and as you said, the case investigation, infection prevention and control. Next slide, please. So when it comes to measles is one of those diseases that makes you think of the word exanthem. And you think of exanthem, and then the other word is enanthem. Now, exanthem actually talks about, it's a Greek word that describes a flower blossoming. So you actually think of the child is breaking out with a viral rush. It's like a flower also blossoming, okay, if you can think of it like that. But let me just say that exanthems don't just apply to viral infections. You may also get them in bacterial infections. You may also get them immune reactions, drug, etc. When we say enanthems, an enanthem is the rush. It's also that occurs within, so sort of an internal rush. And now, because fever and rush, and we have students or residents on this call, we just can't help discussing what is known as fever and rush. And measles is one of those classical examples of fever and rush. So Nanama, you're going to help me just to go through these 4 exercises, okay? We'll just have people responding. You can just put it in the chat. Initially, I had 25 minutes, so I was going to use 5 minutes to do this, but I think my time has been decreased. But it doesn't matter, we'll do it briefly. So just look at this first question. You have an 18-month-old boy with a history of cough, fever, reddening of the eyes of 4 days and generalized rush. What is your differential diagnosis? And what is an important part of the history to take? Nanama, any responses there? So just check the chat for me, okay? And then we can go on. Any answers?
Not yet. They're still typing. Okay, so Barbara said measles and rubella. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, so very good. So obviously, when you have the 3 C's, okay, you have you should, as we've already seen, you have fever, you have this kind of rush. You should think about it. Other things would be maybe you could think of adenovirus infection as well. You could think of scarlet. Okay, and what is that important? Kawasaki, all of them are good. What is an important part of the history that you take? Any responses there? Quickly, even if you get 1 or 2, an important part of the history. So I'm happy that an important part of the history, the immunization, absolutely. So you want to know the immunization from the talks that we are having. Yes, the immunization history. So you don't see this and miss not say measles. Okay. So can we go into the next question, please? So what about this one? A 6-year-old presents with a sore throat and fever, is found to have a large inflamed tonsils and tender cervical lymphadenopathy with a rash. The rash is described also as erythematous. It blanches. It also has a sandpaper quality. What is the most likely diagnosis? Anybody? They say the rash has a sandpaper quality. Any differential, or what is your most likely diagnosis? Look at the next question. It says, very good. So scarlet fever, I'm happy you said that. Now, what is a non-suppurative complication? So fever and rash is a very important topic. Yes, scarlet fever. Non-suppurative complication is very important complication that we should know. Anyone? Non-suppurative complication. Residents, exams candidates, a non-suppurative complication of scarlet fever. Anybody? Non-suppurative. Yes, rheumatic heart disease. I've seen one, so I can go on. Yes. Another one is also acute post-streptococcal glomerulonephritis. Very, very important. Okay. Can I have the next question? Quickly, so I can start. So you have a 13-year-old who presents to the emergency department after a day of fever, sore throat, arthralgia, and rash. There's a rash that blanches on pressure over the face, neck, trunk, tender posterior cervical and occipital lymphadenopathy. The next day, the fever and rash subsided, but there was pain in the oral cavity. Any two differentials? Look at some of the things that we have said. That gives you the clues. For infectious disease, there'll always be the fever and rash. So any two differentials: tender lymphadenopathy, fever and rash, arthralgia. Very good. Rubella. So it's rubella. So we'll go on. So rubella is one. EBV is also another. Okay. So, and these are things. So there's a myriad of illness. And of course, you know that rubella, the first one was the first disease. The second scarlet fever was second disease. This is not what is known as third disease, isn't it? Okay. Let's go on to the fourth one, which will be our final question. You have a 12-month-old with a high-grade fever of 3 days, and you have a generalized rash that appears. As soon as the rash appears, the fever abates. What is the most likely diagnosis, please? Quickly, and then we can go on. List how the rash looks like. And the interesting thing is that, no, it's not slap cheek. Yes, it is. It's not rubella, it's roseola. Yes, so that is the sixth disease, roseola. It's very characteristic, okay? The appearance of the rash, and then your fever subsides. And most of these children, they'll be receiving antibiotics because you have a child with a high temperature. You are going to start antibiotics, you are going to do some investigations. So sometimes when the rash appears, we even think it's a drug reaction, but it's actually roseola. And that is what is known as the sixth disease, okay? So these things are exciting, and we should always take time to look. So we have rubiola, that is measles. You have rubella, that is your German measles, and you have roseola. These are very important, as well as all the others. Sorry, have the next slide, please. So I don't know why this has come into the slide. When you're evaluating a child with fever and rash, there are some things that you should, someone drawing on the slide. There are some epidemiologic clues like the age. Okay, so roseola, you know the age. Measles, look at the age that we've talked about. The season of the year. Have you traveled to an endemic area? Okay, any exposures to animal bites, insect bites. If you've been to a place where tick bites is in common, you should think about it. Your immunization history, the immune status of the patient. Some people with B cell defects, T cell defects, sickle cell disease, HIV, the characteristic of the lesion, how does the rash progress? These are all important things that you need to find out, and these symptoms that are associated. So that is enough for fever and rash. And then you just, because measles is one of the classic conditions about fever and rash, I just had to bring this in. So let's go on to the topic for the day, please. Next slide. The objective today is to teach really on the clinical presentation, case investigation, as well as the infection prevention and control of measles. And our expected learning objectives are that we should be able to explain the pathogenesis and basis of immune suppression in measles. Okay, measles induces such a deep immune suppression that puts the patients even at risk later for infections. Why does that happen? We should be able to evaluate a child who presents with measles. We should know the appropriate sampling methods and the tests that we use. And also very important to know the IPC steps. Now that we are saying that there's increasing cases, what are the IPC steps? It's so important so that we don't infect others, okay? So we start by saying that measles virus is an RNA virus. It's from the family Paramyxoviridae, and the genus virus. And so that's why sometimes you may hear that the rash is mobiliform in nature. That is, it's measles-like in nature, okay? The basis reproduction number is 10 to 14. What this means is that before vaccines were available, if one person got measles, about 10 to 14 people around them are going to get measles. And that is very infectious. So it's a very contagious illness. It spreads from person to person through respiratory droplets. Either you're coughing, you're sneezing, or then you've coughed onto a table, you touch your eyes, you can get infected. And what is also critical is that they have small particles that can float. So you cough, it can actually suspend in the air for almost 2 hours. And so if you just entered and then you are not immune, you can get infected. Humans are the natural host. And because humans are the natural host and reservoir of the virus, it means that we should be able to eliminate measles, because it's not like it's in animals that will mean that you can't catch all the animals, obviously, but if it's humans, then it's good, isn't it? Now, you're contagious 4 days before the rush and 4 days after the rush. And of course, 4 days before the rush, you wouldn't know, because it takes the rush to appear for you to think about the measles. But that is how contagious a patient, how measles is. Next slide. So during an outbreak such as what is happening, which group of people are at risk? Of course, severely immunocompromised persons. And because we say that measles itself puts you at risk, it depresses the immune system. Okay, those who are too young to be vaccinated, so you haven't had your vaccine yet, you are going to be at risk. Pregnant women who do not have presumptive evidence of measles immunity, they are not sure whether they were immunized or not. From pregnant women, we'll see later that they have a severe disease. Any person who is not vaccinated, you are working in a medical facility, you don't know if you are vaccinated, you are traveling, you're going to an endemic area, you don't know about your vaccination. These are the people that are at risk. I'm most concerned for the infants who are too young to be vaccinated and the severely immunocompromised persons. So what does the pathogenesis look like? So this is an illness that we would say it's an airborne infection. What this means is that, let's look at this person who coughs or sneezes, okay? He drops these droplets. Now, because we said it can suspend, the droplets is tiny. So you have droplet nuclei. It's so tiny, it can suspend. And it can go up to a distance, because it's small, it's light. It can fly and it can remain for up to 10 meters and also stay in the air for about 2 hours. And so because of that, you can come into contact if you just enter the room. And it can also, if you're in a room where somebody is. Okay. So you require certain precautions known as airborne. That is what the pathogenesis is like. It's first as an airborne infection, person to person. Now let's look also, the incubation period usually is about 10 to 14 days. And we'll talk about a range of about 7 to 23 days. The virus will enter through the respiratory mucosa or your conjunctiva. And initially, there'll just be that replication that is local. After that, there's a primary viremia where the virus will seed into the regional lymph nodes and then also disseminate through the blood into the reticuloendothelial sites, okay? That is your primary viremia. And then the virus will continue to spread itself, going on to body surfaces, to grow on the body surfaces, okay? All this, depending on the amount of load that has occurred. Now, when this happens, at the end of this period, we have what we call another viremia. So there are 2 points of viremia. At the end of the second viremia, that is when the first symptoms will appear, and that is your respiratory symptoms. Now, this period is what will be known as your prodromal stage. The prodromal stage is when you have your fever, you have your cough, coryza, and conjunctivitis. And then after a day or two, you see what we call the Koplik spots. Now, this prodromal period is going to last about 3 to 4 days. Most will say 4 days. After that period, you're going to see your rash. Now, there's the appearance of the prodromal stage. After a day or two, you have what is known as Koplik spots, and I'll show that. You see the Koplik spots. The Koplik spots will also be able to, it's quite pathognomic for measles. So you should always try to look inside the mouth for these coupled spots. But of course, it's not everybody who will have these spots. Then you have your rush. So there's that period of shedding. You've had your incubation period. The incubation period, nothing was happening outside. It was just a lot of things happening inside. I'm just reiterating what I'm saying. You have a lot of things happening inside. There's viremia. Then after that, you have the prodromal stage. After 10 to 14 of the virus just being in you, doing its own thing, then you have the first symptoms. That is the prodromal. Then the rash appears after 4 days, okay? And then after the rash appears after 4 days, then by day 5, 6, 7, the rash begins to go. And then you have your antibody levels also beginning to rise. So this is really the pathogenesis of what happens during the measles infection. And depending on your immune system, depending on the amount of viremia, you may have more complications than another person, or even maybe you have been vaccinated, but not completely. Thank you. Thank you for taking the red lights away. Okay. So now, measles also does one thing that makes it a very interesting virus. It depresses your immune system to the stage that even months, on some times, years after the infection, your immune system continues to be suppressed. It's suppressed to the extent that now, even though you have developed the immunity for measles, you are put at risk of other infections. You are put at risk bacterial, other viral infections, and the infections from measles is actually the #1 cause of mortality. Now, various pathogenesis or pathways have also been propagated for this immune suppression. I'll just try to explain. And I'm sure if you were on one of the talks we had in December when we looked at the immune system, this will be a little easier to understand. So one of the things is we have a transient lymphopenia, so a decrease in your lymphocyte counts. It is marked in your CD4 cells and your CD8 cells. Your CD4 cells are what your helper cells, your CD8s are what your killer cells. Now you need your CD4 cells to stimulate your B cells to produce immunoglobulins for your CD8 cells to act. So there is apoptosis there. Lymphocyte cells are depressed. So how are your killer cells going to act when the CD4 is not acting for immunoglobulins to be produced? So there's a big problem there. So lymphocyte apoptosis of your CD4 and CD8. Then you also have what we say impaired lymphoproliferation. So first, the counts are less. Then even the counts that are there, they are also not functioning well. They are impaired. Okay, there are abnormalities in their function. So you have a decrease in quantity and a decrease in quality. Then you have these cytokines, interleukin 10 and interleukin 4, that are increased. But what is wrong with them being increased? The problem is that interleukin 10 and 4, they downregulate some cytokines. They suppress your macrophages. Macrophages are fighting for you, but they are suppressing the macrophages as well, okay? And then they remain elevated for weeks. So again, the suppression of your immune system. This is so marked. Then you have interleukin 12 as well, which is critical to developing cell-mediated immunity. We know that in the measles virus, measles disease, you need your cell-mediated immunity to help clear the virus. But interleukin 12, which will help you, is actually also depressed, and it actually stays for a very long time. Then finally, you also have impaired antigen presentation. So you need your antigens to be presented, okay? And these are like your microbes. There are some cells, dendritic cells. They'll bring the organisms, they'll present it, okay, to T cells. These are fights them for us. But this process is also lost, okay? So you've lost this process. You've lost antibody production. And this can go on for months and years, as I've mentioned. So you realize that even there's tuberculosis reactivation. Patients with latent TB, they may get TB. And it can even develop a state of anergy. So a person who has measles, after some months, when you do the TST test, you do your Mantoux test for a suspected TB. And measles is one of the reasons why you may get a negative response, okay? So this is the marked immune suppression. This is the basis for the mortality. So measles is no child's play. It's no illness that must be taken lightly. Can we have the next slide, please? And so no wonder there's beneficial effects of vitamin A, because what does the vitamin A do for you? There's a short-term increase in your antibody production. We've talked about the fact that antibody production goes down. The immunoglobulins will not produce because the CD4s did not bring them, okay? And so there's that short-term increase, but also diarrhea. The diarrhea that occurs, and we saw in Professor Mumin's presentation that some of the children had diarrhea. So again, the vitamin A will help to restore and maintain your gut integrity. So we've already mentioned this. This is your prodrome. Sorry, this is your prodrome stage. You have your high fever, there's malaise, then the 3Cs, the very, very dangerous 3Cs. Once you see them, you need to be worried. Then the Koplik spots, and of course, some people may also have diarrhea. Now, what are these? Next slide, please. These Koplik spots, they are 1 to 3 millimeter whitish. If you look at the slide on my left, it's more grayish. So some is described as grayish or whitish. The one on my right is more whitish. Okay, there are elevations. It has an erythematous base. I'm sure you agree with me how very erythematous the base is. Okay, typically on the buccal mucosa opposite to your molar teeth, but it may be found anywhere else. It's been described as grains of salt on a red background. As I said, it improves the accuracy of your diagnosis. So try and look for it, but you don't. If you don't see it, it does not mean that it is not measles. Okay. Of note, you may have some immunocompromised persons who may not even develop a rash. So now, just bear with me. Nanama, again, I just want people to say what A, B, and C is. What is A? Can you spot the diagnosis in A? Anybody? Quickly, please. Very good. So I've seen Koplik spot. You're right. A is Koplik spot. Thank you very much. And B? What is B? Kawasaki, yes. Strawberry tongue, yes. Strawberry tongue. So yes, it can go for Kawasaki, also scarlet fever, of course. Thank you. And what about C? Who can get C? If you get C, then you get it. No, C is not scarlet. For Shima, very, very good. Yes, it's for Shima spot. Okay, and you see that again in rubella, like in the case that we talked about, that child later had that growth. Okay, that is Shima, and it's seen in rubella. Very good. Let's go to the next one. So the typical exanthem of measles is erythematous, it's blanching. You may have blanching in rubella. So you see fever and rash, you don't joke with it. You really need to know it so that you can diagnose properly. Dark red to purple. It's erupts over a period of 2 to 4 days, as I said. It will begin on the head, so it starts. We have this funny book in microbiology called Medical Microbiology, made ridiculously easy. And so it describes it as you have a can of measles paint is poured over you in this diagram. Once it's poured on your head, see the direction in which it's poured. It's poured over your head. It goes down, 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 down. And when you are recovering, it is the same way, okay, that it recovers. And so that is what it has, this cephalocaudal progression. It's not the only condition that you have a cephalocaudal progression, but in measles, that is what you actually have. Okay. Can we all go on to the next slide? So again, it's just the appearance, the slow. You shouldn't forget this. I'm just emphasizing that how the measles rash, it does this, starts from head, it goes down, begins to resolve. It does that in the same area. And next slide. So, I mean, the third picture is one picture that's in every measles. You're likely to see it. It's all over the internet, okay? But this is what you see in a dark child. You may have a rash that looks like that. You have a rash, different phases that look at how it's coalesced. In the middle picture, you see how they have gathered together. Some are singly, some they begin to gather. Okay. It's very yes, as the pointer is. And then you have that of the third one with really showing the typical red eyes. Okay. You don't miss that. You need to suspect and you need to get tested to confirm it. Next slide. Yes, in severely malnourished children, you may see this appearance when the rash is desquamating. You have this appearance of this rash. Okay, so they look very ill as well, but you have this picture as well happening in some of the children, especially malnourished or vitamin A deficient, because that puts you at risk of immune suppression. Next slide, please. It's not just happening in children. We know the outbreaks that are happening out there in the US, where you have adults who are people, anti-vax people. This is what happens to them, very ill as well. You see their rashes also coalescing. So fever and rash, measles, proven otherwise, okay. Now, what else may you find during the exanthemas? You may have a high fever, the fever as high as even to 40 degrees, pronounced respiratory signs, including even things like pharyngitis, and not surprisingly, generalized lymphadenopathy and splenomegaly. As I talked through the pathogenesis, I told you how there's that initial spread within the reticuloendothelial sites. Okay, so examine, look out for your lymph nodes, look out for splenomegaly as well. These all to aid. Then there's recovery and immunity. The cough itself may last for about 1 to 2 weeks after the rash, we understand. When you start to have your fever, continuous fever beyond the 3 to 4 days, you need to be concerned about the fact that you may be developing measles-associated complication. It's worse in those who are, have immunodeficiencies, which includes malnutrition. Okay, the immunity that is gained is thought to be lifelong, but there have been very rare reports of some, rare reports of some people who have not, who have developed measles again, but it's very, very rare. Now, bronchopneumonia is our most common complications. Okay, of course, the pulmonary complications leads to the most mortality. When it comes to the GI symptoms, diarrhea tends to be more common. So if you see a child who has, you've heard the case definition, it will be reiterated. You have a child who comes in with what looks like acute abdomen, but you still have this fever and rash. Don't forget that appendicitis may even be one of the complications. We talked about it spreading through the reticuloendothelial site, so it can happen. You may have otitis media, which may make you deaf. Keratoconjunctivitis may predispose to blindness as well. Now, we have when it comes to neurologic symptoms, you may have encephalitis, okay, acute disseminated encephalomyelitis, and subacute sclerosing panencephalitis. That's what we typically call SSP, okay. For the encephalitis, it's about 1 in 1,000 cases may occur. It usually occurs within a few days, okay, of the rash. So again, you're having temperature, you're expecting that the temperature should be going down, your rash has come, it's not happening. You need to be looking out for some of these complications, and you have a symptom suggestive of an encephalitis, your seizures, your CNS, other CNS signs. When you do your CSF, you're going to find pleocytosis, okay, increase in white cell counts. And then you also have an increase in your protein level. Measles is one of those viruses when your protein level tends to be high, your glucose is going to be normal. For Adam, it also occurs in about 1 to 3, no, sorry, the previous slide, 1 to 3 per 1,000 again. And of course, it's not as severe as with it's not as severe as encephalitis, but of course, we know it's a post-infectious complication. SSP is fatal. It occurs about 7 to 10 years after you have developed the immediate initial measles infection. It's thought to be actually due to persistent measles infection in the CNS. Within 1 to 2 years, the person is dead. So it's quite a severe infection. Okay. Next, please. So this is a paper that was written by the late Prof. Comey. It looked at the admissions that occurred over a 10-year period at the Kolebu Teaching Hospital where I work from 1973 to 1982. The most frequent complication was bronchopneumonia, and also the most commonest cause of death. Complications were frequent, mortality was high. Against measles, it's a severe illness, okay? The range of admissions between 7 to 12 months, yeah. In the next slide, we see the complications that occurred in Nigeria. Again, bronchopneumonia showed the highest complication.
Dr. Dame, please, we have 5 minutes more.
All right, okay, I'll be cool. Next slide, I change it. Again, measles in pregnancy also tends to be quite severe. In a study that was done in Namibia, about 55 pregnant women, they had so many measles-related complications, diarrhea, pneumonia, encephalitis, and also had poor adverse maternal and fetal neonatal outcomes, as we'll see in the next slide. Among those who were pregnant with measles and those who had no measles, spontaneous abortion was high in those with measles. Intrauterine fetal death was also high. Maternal mortality, all these were significantly higher in those who had measles than those. So again, measles tends to be associated with severe outcomes. Next slide, please. Now, we hear the term modified measles. This usually occurs there are some people who who have non-protective immunity. We've all heard the term before. So maybe you have a child who, just like in those who have not been immunized, they have not cleared, the antibodies have not been cleared. Those antibodies are still there, may sort of give them some kind of immunity, but it's not enough to prevent the disease from happening. And so they may have the disease, but it tends not to be so severe. And they have what we call the modified measles. It tends not to be so severe. The other type that we may have heard of is also, the next slide, is the atypical measles. This is not actually rare, and it's not important to us. Again, it's just for us to know what that term was. There were some people in America, they received this measles virus antigen. It did not give them full protection, and so they tend to result in severe illness. And not surprisingly, it's not actually relevant to us, but more of, but you may just see it in your questions, that just because we are students and we are learning as well, these are some of the things that we need to know. It's quite different from modified. So your laboratory findings include thrombocytopenia, leukopenia. You may have spore-added infection and might have a leukocytosis. You may have a T cell cytopenia as well. Your chest X-ray shows your pneumonitis, a whole range. And then when you do histology of maybe your biologic samples, if you're able to do it, you may actually see what we call giant cells, and the appearance is in the next slide. Okay, so this shows your pneumonia, encephalitis, okay, an MRI showing encephalitis as well. Or the next slide shows the giant cell. So that is very pathognomic. That is why you have your inclusion bodies. So we see this, one of the differentials that, yes, exactly, one of the differentials is really measles. You see, it's a giant cell pneumonia. It's really, really severe and causes the majority of deaths. Next slide. So how do we diagnose this? So we know IgM, antibody specific, or you may also do IgG. When it's IgG, you need to take two samples, the acute and the convalescent, and there must be a 4 increase in the titer, okay, 4-fold rise in the acute and the convalescent titer. You may also do PCR, that is, has a sensitivity of almost 100%. Molecular analysis also will be used to determine the genotype of the virus, and is a way to distinguish sometimes the rashes from a virus or the rashes from a vaccine, or if you need to see an outbreak, you are linking sources to what you're seeing, molecular analysis. What samples do you need for a serology? Definitely you need a serum, and then for cultures, you can do nasopharyngeal, throat, and also for the urine samples, all these kind of samples that can be done. Next. So respiratory tract complications, I think you said this, okay, this has really come out, and so we can go on to the next slide. SSP is fatal. You don't want to go there. So what's the case definition? Prof mentioned it's the same thing. You have a person with fever, maculopapular rash. It should not be a vesicular rash, as in chickenpox, okay? It's non-vesicular, and you have any of the 3 C's. Or even when a healthcare worker, maybe after this lecture, you decide that I suspect measles, is good enough for us to suspect, but you use the knowledge that you have gained so that you don't have so many cases. It's confirmed when there's laboratory confirmation, or there's a link during an outbreak, epidemiological link, maybe using your molecular analysis. Next, please. I'm sure my time is almost over. So what you do, does it meet the case definition? Is the person at risk? You need to notify, and then it must be confirmed. Next, please. Very important is the IPC measures. I want us to just touch briefly on this. Because I said it's airborne, you need airborne precautions. You need to identify your patients. You provide a face mask. It is going to be surgical, normal face mask for the patient, so that the person will not provide droplets, and you, the person, needs to put on an N95. Let me repeat, you need to put on an N95 so that you can filter it. I said to you that the virus can stay in the air, suspend for up to 2 hours. It is very small, so you need to make sure that you're putting on an N95. It's very important. When the patient has left the room, do not enter the room for up to 2 hours. Again, if the virus is still suspended, let him finish suspending before you go inside. Okay, next slide, please, quickly. Don't go to the room of that person if you are not sure of your immunity. If you are not sure, let those who are sure of their immunity go into the room. We don't want to have adults who will have or people without immunity. You wouldn't have a child who has not been immunized going into that group, are going to visit. No, we don't do that, okay? It's very important. Next, and like I said, your face mask to filter for you. Don't transport them. Okay, you can continue. You have to give me the answer to this. I'll just keep talking. Don't transport the patients if you don't need to, or you use a time when you need to transport them when nobody's around, so that you limit spread into the hospital. Okay, you need to contact the other people. I'm bringing a patient with that needs airborne precautions. Then they'll prepare. They also put on their N95. They also put on their N95 as well. And so it's very important. You don't, like I said, if the person is going to be admitted, then they should not at home. They should also be in isolation for up to 4 days after your rush. Okay, they shouldn't, you have to make sure that you're protecting them. And next.
Dr. David, please, you have 5 extra minutes, so you can.
Okay, I will finish soon. So which of these periods give the excess immunity when the vaccine is first given? Quick. Anybody, just the answer I need, and then we move on. Which of these periods? Because we use these periods to learn and teach as well. That is why all this is coming in, okay? 9 months, any other question? 6 months gives the greatest immunity. 6 months, 12 months. So I'll take 12 months and I'll go on. The reason is that before 6 months, we know that due to the immaturity, I'm sorry, when the things keep popping up, it distracts me a bit. Before 6 months, due to the immaturity of the immune system, and also there's presence of neutralizing maternal antibodies, the recommended vaccination, those maternal antibodies, they will decrease the response of the child, okay, if you immunize them so early. But again, you have to balance. So 12 months gives you the strongest seroconversion. However, even though I say this, you need to balance the risk of having measles in that area to when you have to get the time you give. So 9 months seems to be good enough. So WHO actually advocates that in areas where you have measles endemic, you still can use 9 months. Other places like in the US, etc., they will use a time like 12 months. Even in Nigeria, because HIV is also endemic, they actually give it at 6 months. So all this is something that you have to, but what is even more important is that you need to give your second dose. And your second dose, by the time you give your second dose, most of them would have seroconverted. More than 95 of them would get the appropriate seroconversion, because you need a high antibody response. The maternal antibody is going to depress it, and yet you need it. And the immune system is also not so mature. So you just need to balance it. Okay, next slide quickly. Next slide. Yes, so this is what I'm seeing. The WHO recommends this, the first dose is at 12 months, but in countries with high rates like Ghana, you give it at 9 months, and your second dose can be given at 15 to 18 months. Okay, next, so we can finish. So this is what we do in Ghana here. It's a live attenuated vaccine. We give it with the rubella at 9 and 18 months, 0.5 ml subclass. The aim is to keep the population immunity at more than 95% through routine and supplementary immunization activities. Okay, so it's very important because it's so infectious that even if your herd immunity goes down anything like 10%, so you need to keep up 95%. Goes down less than that, you'll just get an outbreak. Next slide, please. I think these are the last slides. Finally, what happens among HIV infected children? Do they develop protective antibodies? Yes, they do. And so this big study that was done, they looked at their antibodies. And interestingly, even for them at 6 months, whereas those without, I mentioned that those without, those at 6 months, no HIV infection, they tend not to get those their protective antibodies are there. But because these ones have HIV, they don't have the protective antibodies from their mother because of the HIV. So they actually develop strong responses. So 6 months is okay. So South Africa, because of their HIV and is endemic so much, they would give them at 6 months. The disease looks the same among them. Some of them tends to be atypical. Some will have disease that are earlier. So I don't know if any of the cases that they've seen, they saw any HIV, but some of them, the age at which they develop it is earlier than in others. Is the vaccine given to them? Yes, it's given to them, except when they're severely immunocompromised. So even though it's a live vaccine, activated vaccine, you still give it to them, except somebody who is so immunocompromised, then they are going to do what? You're going to give them ART, make sure they boost up their immune system before you actually do that. Okay, I think we have come to the end. So finally, there's no evidence for measles and autism. Next slide. You always have to mention this because it's a big thing that happened. So in conclusion, measles is highly infectious. I hope I've been able to convince you that it has serious complications. Okay, we've seen pregnant women, we've seen children, we've seen what it does to everybody, and we've been seeing the cases that have started coming in from the northern region. We can eliminate it from a population. You require vaccination with 2 doses and immunity of 93 to 95. Uptake is very important, and we healthcare providers, we play a very important role in the uptake, and that's what we are doing, educating and advocating that we need to get those vaccines and need to get it fast to stop the spread. Thank you very much. These are the references for those who want to read more. Thank you.
Wow, this is awesome. I'm sure I'm not the only one who thoroughly enjoyed this presentation, and it was worth all the time. Thank you, Dr. Dami. Our MC has been knocked out of the platform by the internet. So I'm going to act as the MC for now. Is that okay with us? Yes? Okay.
Yes, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Saying thank you. Thank you.
Coming. So we'll be taking the questions at the end of the last presentation by the nurse specialist. So we'll move on to the next one, which is management of measles in children. This presentation was supposed to be done by Dr. Charlene Kilber, and she's currently on another assignment and is not able to join us live. She's joined us, but she's not able to present. So I'm going to do the presentation on her behalf. So I'm going to share the slides quickly, and then we are good to go. So in the meantime, you can post your questions in the chat box. Post your questions in the chat box. It's being monitored, and then we'll read out your questions for you during the questions and answers session. Yes, I hope my slides can be seen. So this is management of measles. You realize that the focus will be on children, but most of what will be shared here applies to all. And it's a presentation by Dr. Kilber, and I'm just the spokesperson here. Thank you. So we'll just go straight to classification of measles, clinical classification. Dr. Dami has already walked us through almost everything that we need to know. So we are saying that you can classify as uncomplicated measles, complicated measles, and severe complicated measles. This is important because it will inform what you will do and then in which setting to manage your patients. So for those with uncomplicated measles, we are saying that they can be managed on outpatient basis. And what they need is supportive care. You control their temperature with an antipyretic like paracetamol. You ensure that they are taking enough oral fluids. Most of these ones are able to tolerate orals. And we've heard about measles and malnutrition and their reduced immunity. So ensure that they are taking enough calories in the day to meet what they need. And then, of course, you give them vitamin A. Some may have nasal congestion, and for that one, especially in the infants and the children, saline nasal drops will just do the trick. We are not encouraging you to go for all other forms of nasal drops, including ephedrine and the others. No. Conjunctivitis, here we need to make sure the eyes are cleaned, and in some cases, they may need topical antibiotics. We have understood that they are at risk of infection, other infections, because of their waned immunity. And then those that have mouth ulcers, saline mouthwash, warm saline mouthwash is able to keep the mouth hygienic. Those with complicated measles, and we are saying these are the ones that come with pneumonia. If the pneumonia is classified as mild, and this is by WHO classification or whatever classification method, these are the ones who are coming with fever, cough, maybe a bit of fast breathing, but they don't have signs of severe pneumonia, like chest indrawing and the other signs of distress. For those ones, we are saying they will do well on oral antibiotics, example, amoxicillin. Those that come with croup, the mild forms, again, you can give antibiotics if you suspect that on top of the measles, they may have a secondary bacterial infection. They may also come with otitis media, diarrhea. These are managed as we do for cases of diarrhea. So those, you give them zinc tablets, you make sure they are staying hydrated, and make sure that hand hygiene is being practiced. Those with eye complications, if you have the ophthalmology team, involve them so that they can adequately manage their conjunctivitis, and the severer ones with keratitis can be appropriately managed. We talked about the mouth ulcers. So oral hygiene is very, very, very key. Again, it has been observed that those with poor oral hygiene also transfer to how much calories they're able to eat, affect their appetite, and they may not be able to meet their caloric needs. So oral care is very, very important. And if you don't do it well, they risk getting other super infections or bacterial infections. Now, which ones do we say are severe complicated? And I want us to pay attention to these ones, because once you see these, know that these patients will need inpatient care. And so for some of them, they will even need ICU care. And you should be able to identify them appropriately and then make sure they are being managed in the right settings to improve the outcomes. So those coming with seizures, they are encephalopathic. Those with severe respiratory distress, those with severe croup that does not respond to your initial croup management, patients with mastoiditis, any tenderness around the ear or at the back of the ears, any patient who comes to diarrhea, but this time around is causing dehydration, that patient should be considered as severe complicated and should be hospitalized and managed accordingly. And then those who cannot tolerate anything orally. So if the mouth sores are severe and they are not able to take in enough fluids and feeds to meet their needs for the day, they should also be considered for admission. Those with severe malnutrition and those who have immunosuppression, these ones should be managed in the hospital setting and for some of them in an ICU setting. And those with eye involvement. So eye involvement, especially with severe eye involvement, and not just the watery conjunctivitis, should be considered for hospitalization. We are saying again, the care for even the severe complicated measles is supportive. Stick to the IPC measures as outlined by Dr. Dami. Ideally, you should nurse these patients in an infectious disease unit where the necessary protocols are in place and other patients are not put at unnecessary risk. And then the care is supportive, fluids management, nutrition to be optimized. So this is when you say that the child has diarrhea and you are just encouraging the child to eat, they will not be able to. So you have to assess how much they are able to tolerate and then make sure that you optimize their nutrition and fluids. And again, vitamin A, you realize vitamin A is given to all of them. We give it for 2 days and then you repeat it in about a month. Note the dose regimens. For those less than 6 months, we are given 50,000 units. Those 6 to 11 months, we are given 100,000 units. And those more than a year, we are given 200,000 units. Ribavirin is the antiviral agent that is used. Some studies have shown that, yes, we get very good responses in those coming with severe complicated measles. And we give it to those usually under 12 months. And then those coming with pneumonias that require ventilatory support. So these ones can be considered for antiviral therapy. Yes, so that brings us to the end of the management. So the key take-home message here is that the management of measles, whether the uncomplicated form, the complicated form, or the severe complicated form, basically is symptomatic. The nursing care is very, very crucial. Most of them will probably die from other infections that they will pick up and other complications of measles. So the nursing aspect is very, very important. over for now. I don't know whether our MC has been able to join us. If our MC is not here, then we can take a few questions from the chat box and then move to the nursing care for a child with measles. So we'll take a few questions from the chat box. So my facilitators, if you have cited any particular question that you want to respond to immediately, you can go ahead. Otherwise, I'll read out a few.
Okay. I think there's some questions for me, but I'm finding it difficult to sort of scroll. I don't know what's happening. So if you could just.
Okay. I'm
like
scrolling now. Okay, so one is that, can MR affect fetus when the pregnant woman is infected? Can measles, rubella affect the fetus? Yes.
Yes,
I
I
think
mean,
that was
I was
answered.
rushing through. Yes, I was rushing through the end, but we even have what we call congenital measles as well, and the range of illness can range from severe or even to mild. So yes, of course, depending on the level of antibodies that is given to the child. So there is congenital measles as well that affects the fetus that occurs.
All right. Another question is, with the current outbreak of measles, especially in northern Ghana, do you recommend early vaccination for children born in such areas? If so, how early?
Okay. I wouldn't go to change anything right now, because as I showed in those slides, the best time when you actually get even response is actually from 12 months. It was just in that special group of patients, that is HIV infected patients, who, because they have lost maternal antibodies, they get an earlier response. So the 9 months for us with an endemic is still good. We don't have to change anything. What is most important is for us to be able to get a vaccine and to vaccinate the children.
Okay. And then we'll take the last question before our MC takes over. Please, is there any correlation between measles and systemic lupus erythematosus, SLE?
Okay, so we know that there's a lot of immune responses that goes on, and a lot of studies have seen that increased measles antibodies have been seen in patients who have SLE than in their controls. Some of it is thought to be the persistent measles infection in them, but there's a whole lot. So there's a lot of literature to read on that aspect here. So they've noticed increased measles antibodies in those patients. I've seen a question that I also want to answer. I think I can read that one here. It says, regarding measles vaccine not being given to the severely compromised, what is severely compromised? So here we are talking about stage 4 disease. We are talking of those with CD4 counts less than 200 or CD4 percentage less than 15%. Thank you for that question. That's a candidate who wants to make sure that she gets it right.
It's one of the reasons for this training. All right. So thank you very much, Dr. Dami, for aptly answering those questions. Yes. Once the facilitators allow, we'll share the presentations. I think someone wanted to know. We'll share the presentations once we get it.
I'm sorry. There's also a question here for someone. He said, for those who were immunized once for our kids, or for our kids who were older and did not get the 2, do we have adequate immunity, or is it worth getting a second dose? It's definitely worth getting a second dose, please. Once you have, we know that immunity is established after your 2 doses. So it's definitely worth doing that. We know that you can have it in adults, you can have it in older kids. So if you know that you've had only 1 for your child, please get the second dose. Thank you.
Okay. Wonderful. I think MC is back. Gustav, please, can you make our MC co-host again so that she can unmute? Thank you. In the meantime, please unmute her.
Sorry. Please, there's just one more question from Benedicta. If a 3-year-old missed her 18 months, should they receive just that vaccine, or they should repeat it and get a booster? Please, they should repeat that. They just need to repeat that, the 18 months one. Okay, thank you. So it's almost like you've just had one, so you just need to get the second one. Thanks.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you so much for answering these questions so nicely. So our MC is here. Our MC, if you can hear me, say hello to us. Okay, so if our MC is not here, then Miss Eugenia, I'll say, is next. He's going to take us through very key aspects of the nursing care of a child with measles, and I'll be sharing her slides from here. Okay. All right. So, Miss Eugenia, I'll say, please, the floor is yours, your audience. Thank you.
Good evening. We are continuing with the nursing care for a child with measles. The nurse taking care of the child with measles must be aware of the proper procedure to be done and then the proper handling of the patient. Please, next slide. Okay, so this is the outline. We do a nursing assessment, nursing diagnosis, the nursing care planning with our goals, and then the intervention, and then we evaluate. And finally, we'll get some precautionary measures to be taken as we nurse these children with measles. With the nursing assessment, we do our physical examination and we assess the signs and symptoms for us to know whether what we are dealing with is indeed measles. Then we can also do our vital signs, temperature, pulse, respiration, oxygen saturation. This will serve as a baseline. And then as we continue our management, if there's anything deviating, then it can be time. We also assess for the knowledge of the disease. If it's an older child, what they know, or the caregivers, so that we build on what they know and together we can smoothly manage the patient. Then the hygienic practices. We also have to know the skills they know in hand hygiene, hand washing, the use of alcohol, hand sanitizers, cough etiquette, and then how to handle patient burdens overall. All these we assess to reduce the spread of the infection. Then from assessment, as we get our data, we can make our nursing diagnosis. We have all heard measles is highly contagious, so definitely we are going to isolate this child in case it's severely, the condition is very severe as we manage in the facility. So there's going to be impaired social interaction. Child will be isolated from family, from friends, from other children who are sick, from other healthcare professionals. So the reason why we think that the social interaction is going to be impaired. Then we can also think of risk for impaired skin integrity. Measles is extremely itching, and so there's a possibility that a child with measles will be stretching and then it will bring a break in the skin. High risk for infection, and of course there's going to be acute pain as a result of the skin lesions and then irritated mucous membrane. These are nursing care plan without that at the end of the day, we know that the skin is clean, is intact, mucous membrane will stay moist, and then of course there's going to be reduced discomfort because we cannot take it out entirely, but to the point where patient can bear. Then also patients and then caregivers or significant others who reason with us will get to know why we isolated this patient. And then our other objective is also to prevent infection. These are nursing intervention. Isolation, which we have said earlier, is very key. And it's going to be in isolation room, any private room. Then the door should always be closed, but these rooms should be well ventilated, which can also help. And then we can put on mask for the patient if it's an older one. Skin care, as we have heard earlier, we need to, definitely they will scratch, so we need to keep their nails down. They can also wear long sleeves and long pants. This will not expose their body much for them to scratch. And then we can, any recommended lotion by ID specialists, they can apply them to keep their skin moist. We also take care of the eye, where we clean with warm saline the dry secretions. And infants especially get irritated with bright light. So these kids must be nursed in a dark, quiet room with little disturbances. This can all help improve their care. Hydration is paramount. As we have heard earlier, there's high fever, there's vomiting, there's diarrhea. So we need to keep them hydrated. If they can take it orally, that is recommended. ORS can be given. If not, we can go intravenous to keep these children hydrated and to prevent any dehydration. Temperature control. We do everything we can to bring the temperature down. So we serve prescribed antipyretics, tepid sponging, remove extra clothing. We will put clothes on, but they should be light. And then we can also remove extra burdens to give them some kind of comfort. Adequate bed rest is very paramount, whether child is admitted or is at home, so that they can rest and then get healed on time. Then finally, we can also administer any prescribed medication, be the vitamin A that we have heard of, the antibiotics, any prescribed medication, we give it timely, we document for the child to be well. Then at the end of the day, if all these interventions are carried out judiciously, timely, and then we can evaluate and say that the skin is intact, then mucous membranes is moist, and child's comfort was maintained, discomfort reduced to the barest minimum. And also, because they understood us, the reason why we isolated them, they gave up their maximum cooperation. And so there was no stress in managing this child. Finally, we have these some precautionary measures to take home. The best way to prevent measles is to be vaccinated, as we have heard. Always wear protective clothing when nursing children with measles. Then we should practice good hand hygiene before and after putting on gloves. Then encourage the use of alcohol-based hand sanitizer. And as much as is possible, we need to avoid physical contact when we are nursing these patients. Thank you.
Right. Thank you so much, Ms. Eugenia Osei, for a very short but very informative presentation. Is our MC back online with us? Otherwise, I'm going to take, okay, yes, our MC is back. Wonderful. All right, I think our MC is struggling to unmute. So I'll take a few questions from our colleagues on YouTube Live. So facilitators, please be ready. I'm reading a few questions from our participants from YouTube Live. YouTube Live colleagues, say hello. We are here with you. So the first one is, with the high temperature, that is fever, can we still give the vaccines while the patient is on admission? Then the second one is, can air conditioning be of help in reducing the 2 hours air suspension of the virus? I think this one goes to Dr. Dami. And then the third one is, what will be essential in setting up an isolation unit for measles? Okay, so the first one is fever. Can we still give the vaccines when the patient still has fever and is on admission? And then air conditioning, reducing the 2 hour suspension of the virus. I think, Dr. Dami, can you please attempt to respond to this?
Yeah.
question?
So how do we give the vaccine when there's high fever? So as I said in the lecture, when you get the measles infection, you actually establish immunity. So you're not going to give the vaccine because then you have actually developed your own natural antibodies. So that does not come in. The measles vaccine does not come in then at all. The second thing is whether 2 hours can you use? No, you cannot. These are rooms. There are special rooms that are used. Sorry. There are special rooms that are used. These are rooms that require particular air cycling filtrations. Okay, we don't have it in Ghana, or maybe then newer facilities may have, but you need a particular room when it comes to airborne filtration. So it's a cycle, it's filtering the air 6 to 12 cycles per hour. In the absence of that filtration, you just have to be in your room. It is en suite, have your own washroom facilities. The door should always be locked. That is what you need for your airborne, but not air conditioning at all. It does not play any role here.
Okay. And then the third one was essentials for setting up an isolation unit for measles. Oh, yes.
It's essential. So again, you need the room, isn't it? You need the isolation room. And of course, it's not as if each patient should have their own room. If you are having cases, you can cohort them, as that means you can put them together. You can put these cases together, okay? And that's cohorting, but they need to really be isolated. So of course, the space is important. Then you need the N95 that I talked about for healthcare workers. I want to reiterate, you need to wear your N95. The virus suspends in air, and so you need to filter it. You need mask for also the normal mask for the patients as well. You need your hand sanitizers and etc. as well. These are the basic things that I think that you need to really use, and all the other things. So whenever we say airborne precautions, it comes in addition to standard. Always you would use standard precautions. Standard precautions is what you'd use for every person. I don't know you have measles, but I must do it. This includes things like safe injection disposal, waste management, okay, when to use gloves. So standard is standard. So even though it's airborne, all the things that you need for your standard, you are going to use them. The extra things are the fact that it's the room, they have to be isolated. They need your N95 and those things. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Dame and all the facilitators. So we can see that it is exactly top of the hour, 6 o'clock p.m. I will ask that we are patient because we want to hear from the PSG president, Dr. John Adebiapia, as he shares in 5 minutes what PSG has been doing in terms of advocacy to improve our vaccine stock. So please bear with us, even as we overrun our time a bit. Thank you very much. I hope it has been engaging and interesting. So Dr. Debi, please, you are on. Over.
Thank you very much. And then I'll follow the same trend and the existing protocol that has been established. I'll briefly turn my camera on for you all to see me and then turn my camera off again. Yes, and then talking about what PSG has or have been doing to ensure there's vaccine in the system. I guess one of the things we need to talk about is what we have already. I don't know whether you see my slides. Can you see my slides?
They have gone off. Okay, now it's showing now. Yes, if you can put it in slide mode, that would be perfect. Wonderful.
All right, sure. Yes. So basically, a quick look at what we have been doing, and then we've been doing a lot of advocacy since the beginning of the outbreaks. When it was detected, and then we became aware in the background, we were in touch with a few other people. We initially had to gather our data and information together. But again, the background is the fact that Ghana has been quite successful with immunization programs. And as a result of that, the large numbers of cases that we're seeing in the past when I was medical students, for instance, we are not seeing them till recently when we started seeing the surge. And that success was as a result of a lot of work done by civil society then. I remember our professors around those days putting in a lot of effort, then also some of our seniors doing the same thing. And then we have no choice but to step into what they have done and ensure that we also are successful. Where are we now? Currently, we know there are shortages of some vaccines reported. And it's not only about measles. We know polio, we know rotavirus, we know BCG. They are all in short supply. I mean, there's very shortages across the country. There are places where they have some, places that they don't have some. But the challenge is that currently measles is the outbreak that we have to deal with. And if it's a sign of things to come, then we have to be sure that we have to hope that we don't see rotavirus, which also used to cause a lot of diarrhea, severe dehydration, and death, and also polio causing also death, and then complications, which usually leads to paralysis, long-term paralysis. So we need to be up and doing, and Pediatric Society cannot sit unconcerned. We put out a press statement when things were getting very heated. And as a result of that, we've had both the legislature, we've had the executive or the Ministry of Health coming out, taking turns. We've had the media also being part of that. Now, what are some of the other part of government? Some of what we have done actually has pushed people out or brought the executive out to talk about what is going on. Just like Tony Animal reminded us, and it's in the media, that the minister was in parliament to declare the fact that they have released 6.4 million cedis to UNICEF. And the question is, when was this released? And again, how many vaccines are we going to procure? A lot of questions still unanswered. When will it be available? So yes, we are doing some work in the background, but still we need to do a little bit more to do that. Prior to that, we also engaged Parliament. So we did some lobbying with some of the parliamentarians in terms of advocacy. And I'm happy also to have heard the minister actually asking Parliament also to assist with the advocacy work for partners to assist Ghana. And this is where we all are. We all need to come together to address this issue. And I'm happy for that. I mean, as I reflected on the COVID pandemic, this is not a pandemic, let me say. But as I reflected on it, you know, the COVID pandemic affected adults mainly. And then now we see this outbreak affecting children. How are we going to respond? We've heard about some deaths. Unfortunately, in the last few weeks, we're hearing that there are no deaths, but there have been deaths, and then those deaths should be counted. Let's not bury the deaths, the figures in the sand, in the context that have not been confirmed, but they are suspected cases and still a case. So we don't want any more deaths. Unfortunately, looking at the tip of the iceberg, we're talking about only northern region. But today we've heard that Ashanti actually also has some high numbers, suspected numbers too. And it boils down to the fact that we are not there. We are not ready to actually do that. And therefore, we all need to continue to promote the best scientific knowledge as we are doing now. Pediatric Society is has championed today's presentation. And we also need to address the moral attitude and focus on government. We need to be alert. We need to put the pressure on government to ensure that it delivers on its mandate. You know, we have the Children's Act, and it talks about the right of every child to health. We as Pediatric Society are not encouraging. We are not going to encourage anyone to say, I have money, I want to go and buy my own vaccine. No, every child has a right to health. And this is what we all need to stand up and fight for. We need to encourage, support public health vaccination practices, also get to the public. So we've not directly engaged Ghana Health Service, but at least some of our members are with EPI, airing and contributing towards the objectives of the EPI and Ghana Health Service coverage, target vaccination coverage. And then also we need to interact with partners, which we have done with UNICEF, for instance, to bring this to you. We are in the background also trying to engage partners in terms of providing some resources for highly affected regions and districts. And we need to promote policies that ensure or increase access to vaccines. So here, getting access to vaccine, we need to remind government of its duty, its responsibility. And then strengthen immunization information systems. This is very important. Having said that, I also encourage you all, if you see such cases, rare cases, cases that should have been prevented by vaccines, please draw our attention, inform us so that we can be in the known early and start acting towards that. Yes, I chipped in the issue of reduction in vaccine uptake in those who have the access and then refusing to do it. Now we've seen the consequence of the shortage of measles in the country and on children. Measles is a terrible disease. It's uncomfortable. It kills. It has long-term prognosis, in some cases, bad prognosis. So we don't need to belittle it. We need to look at it from the point of view where every child is made comfortable. And then we need to organize awareness campaign to educate the public, which Pediatric Society will be taking up soon. So in the nutshell, what have we done? Currently, we are in the public awareness creation drive with our press statement, media sensitization ongoing. Some of our members, not most of our members, some of the members have been taking up questions and then from the media, both electronic and then also print. And then legislate, as I also mentioned, the legislature, parliament, we've actually interacted with MPs in that front. But our major header for that is to ensure that ring fencing funding for vaccination. Here, what we want to do is that instead of NHIA reducing, as the minister was saying, providing funding intermittently when they have funding. We don't want that. We want an assured source of funding like the consolidated fund. If Parliament can enact legislature or whatever, a bill, whatever to help include child health, prevention in terms of availability of vaccination on the consolidated fund where it's drawn from. That one, we are assured that whatever happens, we are not going to have this situation we are facing now. Again, we've worked with UNICEF. UNICEF actually has been an awesome partner with us. Anytime we go to them, they don't turn us down, and they have really, they have supported us putting this webinar together. And the health workforce, we are engaging you. Today, this is the first time. We started with our own members on our platform, but we have had to step it up to almost everybody in the country. This is not the end of it. We are going to do more. We've heard a lot about issues, but our focus this evening, late afternoon and evening, was to try and look at managing the outbreak from the clinical point of view. We know the public health people are actually working on the surveillance, and then others, the laboratory people are also working. But you heard a lot about what is happening. Currently, more than 75–80% of cases have not been confirmed. And we will need to do something about that. Here, we need to put pressure on government, just like the COVID time when pressure was put on everybody. Partners came in to donate PCR machines so that we're able to confirm cases. It's not because it's children we can neglect anything. It's the right of the child, and we as adults need to do that. IPC have briefly been described, and I think we need to do a little bit more. The clinical care aspect, Dr. Mumin, and then Dr. Mumin, and then Charlene actually did a presentation on how to care for patients. I won't forget Eugenia's role. And this is what we are doing, but this is the presentation for healthcare workers. Where are we going to care for the surge of cases? Are we planning for that? We've not heard anything. So it's time to start talking about this. Ashanti region 300, Northern region over 570. And the Northern region figures we are mentioning, this is about 2 weeks ago. So meaning that the numbers actually should be going up. This is what I personally think. And usually what comes to us in our hospital is just the tip of the iceberg. And once we have seen this, and this is what is happening, all of us need to go out and then work together, try and ensure that we arrest where we are. So we call on academic institution, our vaccine authorities, public health institutes, government organizations, and others to join us in ensuring that we are actually really moving at top speed to arrest this. Unfortunately, it looks like this is not going to end the next few weeks because the vaccines are not even here. When we start the vaccines, it will take time before we hit the herd immunity again. It's a mess. It's a mess. The whole thing is a mess, and we need to assure that irrespective of physical, economic, and insurance status, vaccines must be made available, must be made accessible to babies and children to complete all scheduled immunization. And this is what I will appeal to all of you. Thank you very much for showing up, and I hope personally, as president of the society leading the group, I hope that we have met some of your need and your expectations. We hope to do more. We have more coming up the next few weeks. As I said, we are engaging with our partners. They will be doing this almost every 2 months. If the need be, we will reduce it. We will reduce the we will increase the frequency so that we can reach as many people as possible. And on that note, I would like to hand over to the MC. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Appiah. Thank you so much. And indeed, everyone is putting in comments saying, amazing presentation, good job. Everything seems to have gone well. And so would like to say a very big thank you to the National Executives and Council of the Pediatric Society of Ghana with support from UNICEF for organizing this very educative session to train healthcare professionals. And I know moving on, everyone will be an advocate to make sure that we get the vaccines. And even for those who have been vaccinated, we make sure we're on the lookout so that there's no outbreak. It doesn't become a pandemic, even as, well, there's an outbreak on a low scale, if I should say, because the numbers we're seeing are harrowing and worrying. But let's make sure we pick them. The surveillance should be increased. Let's all do the little we can to make sure we save the lives of these precious ones. And so on that note, we'll pray and we'll end it. Please, there's an evaluation link. Dr. Opon put up an evaluation link. If you just scroll up in the chat, you will find it. We just want to evaluate the program and how well it's gone, if there are any adjustments to be made, so that subsequently they will do that and make sure we have a great meeting next time. Of course, all the unanswered questions will also be addressed in the next session, hopefully, or we'll find another platform to make sure we do that and engage everyone. So please don't feel left out if your question was not tackled. We'd like to say a prayer to end this program.
Can we take a picture after that?
Sure, please. Let's all turn on our videos after the prayer and then we can take a picture. Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for a successful meeting. We pray that even as we go out there, we will be the lips for these children, the advocates. We will speak for them so that whatever they need to keep them safe and healthy and give us a healthy future will be what we desire. We pray that government will hear our call and they will act swiftly so that these children will be protected. In Jesus' name we pray, amen. And so the videos can go off. Please turn them on. If you know you're not appropriately positioned, please position yourself well. Then Dr. Opon, I presume you are taking charge of the picture taking.
I'm doing that with Gustav.
All right,
Gustav,
great.
so let's take some pictures. Let's take some
Give
pictures.
us your widest smile.
Yes.
Show all your teeth, please.
Yes. If you have to pick your wig, please do that quickly. Okay. All right. Nice shots. Nice shots. Okay. MC, so I think we have some good shots. So
okay.
Thank you all.
On that note, have a lovely weekend. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.